Okay, so let's continue working on this. And as a next step, I want to create another package so that we also practice this again. And I want to outsource this conversion logic here into a new package. So this logic where I convert a bunch of string lines, a bunch of string elements in a string slice to a float64 slice. For that, I'll add a new subfolder, which I'll name conversion. Obviously, the files are always up to you. With a conversion.go file, which belongs to a conversion package. And in there, I'll add a function that could be called strings to floats, because that is what this function should do. It should take a bunch of strings as an input and return a bunch of floats. So the input should be a slice of strings, and the return value should be a slice of float64 values. Though, of course, the conversion can also fail, and therefore I'll also return a second value, which is of type error. Now inside of this function, I then want to loop through a bunch of string values. So I'll grab that for loop, all that code here, actually, copy that, and paste that here into strings to float. And I'll give my input parameter here a name, which I'll name strings. That sounds like a fitting name, so that we can loop through all these strings. And here we then got our string and the string index. To give this all a bit of a more generic name, I'll actually use string value here, or string val, as an identifier. We are using the strconf package, so we should make sure that we actually import that. And I don't want to output error messages here. And I also don't want to close the file here, because we're opening it in some other place of this code. This function here should have nothing to do with reading files or anything like this. Therefore, I'll get rid of all that code. And instead, if we have an error, I want to return that. So therefore, in that case, I will return nil as a value for the float64 slice, and a new error as a value for the error, if we have an error. And that error can be created with help of the errors package with the new function there, and then the message could be failed to convert string to float, something like this. Ultimately, past this if check, we of course know that everything succeeded, and therefore we can store this float price in a list, in a slice of floats. Therefore, outside of the for loop, I will add a new list of floats, a new slice. Float64 is the type I want to use. And the name could be floats, just like this. And then here, after the if check, I will set floats equal to the result of calling append, to which I pass floats, which initially will be an empty slice. And then I'll append a new element to that slice of floats, and that new element is the float price, or here simply the float val, to use a more generic name. And then, of course, after this for loop, I will return this floats slice and nil as a value for the error. Now I'm not using the string index, and therefore we can also replace that with an underscore. So with that, we then got the reusable strings to float function, and this should be strings to floats. So I added an S here at the end. And with that, we can use this function here in the prices.go file instead of creating that for loop here. So here we can simply set prices equal to conversion, importing my own package here. So you must add this import path. And with that added, conversion, this package is accessed here with the dot notation, and we can call strings to floats to pass our lines to this function. And as a result, we get back our floats, which I'll then store in a variable named prices here, or, of course, an error if things go wrong. And then we can remove the for loop, but keep that if check, where we check if we do have an error, in which case I still want to show an error message. This time, though, only the one returned by strings to floats. And here I want to close the file, because we're still in that function where we also opened the file. And then we can store these prices here in job input prices. We also should call file close here, by the way, because of course here we're also done reading the file, and therefore I do want to close it. not just if we had an error, but also if everything worked as expected. So therefore, with that, we outsourced this logic, and hence, if we save everything, the program should still work as before. And it does. But now we outsourced this into a separate package, which we could now use in any project where we need to convert a list of strings to a list of floats.